Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, Tony and I break down our recent success in Nebraska and Wisconsin and detail the strategies we employed and how you can apply them yourself. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and Camo for Conservation. And if you are listening to this on the day it drops, it is November 23, 2023, and you might be tired. You might be wore out. You might be, have a sore tail end or a sore back and very droopy, baggy eyes or whatever it might be in your case, because we've just endured the marathon of the peak of the rut, I guess. I think most people look at the first 2 weeks, maybe the first 3 weeks as that big grind of the rut. That's when rutcations usually happen. That's when we're pinning all of our hopes and dreams on a certain set of days. And Tony and I, we survived it, and we came out the other end, and we've got some stories to tell, don't we, buddy?
We do. And I got to ask you, Mark, is the greater whitetail community kind of ghosting you now? Because you keep calling me to be on these episodes. I'm wondering, did you lose a lot of your buddies in the industry or what?
Yeah, we're getting blackballed. No guests left. It's just me and Tony. No, but it is hard to find guests this time of year because everyone's hunting all the time. But it worked out well because coming into the season, you and I talked about how I wanted to have more episodes of you and me talking about our own hunts. Right? Because people like to follow along with what we're doing and like to hear our firsthand experiences. But the risk of that is that if you and I have a bunch of crappy hunts, we have not a lot of exciting things to tell.
Yeah.
Fortunately, every single one of these episodes that we've done, just you and me, we've each had a shot at a deer or a kill to talk about. So we've had big things to talk about every week. And the same goes for today, because I killed a buck during the rut in Nebraska. You killed a buck during the rut in Wisconsin, and you were with your daughter when she killed a deer. Was that beginning of November as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that was first week sometime, 6th, 7th, something like that. So pretty much the heart of it.
Yeah. So we have got a lot to cover. I want to cover those stories, and I want to, as we try to do, not just tell the story, but really break down the strategies we employed, the tactics that worked, maybe the things that didn't work along the way, any lessons learned, and really try to make this useful for folks so they can take what we learned from this and apply it to their own hunt. So that's the game plan. We're going to talk through a bunch of things related to the last 3 weeks of hunting. And then also at the end, Tony, if you're game for this, I want to look forward a little bit too and just kind of start setting the stage for what's to come. So how we might be thinking about our hunts the last week of November, how our mindset must shift once December comes around, and just help people, prepare for this next phase of the season. Because I think, I don't know if you feel this way, but once Thanksgiving hits, it's a big shift as far as my hunting approach and really what I'm expecting and planning for. So
yeah,
we should probably cover that a little bit too.
Me too, man. I set my bow down and I pick up my 12 gauge and I call my dogs and I go chase roosters for a while.
Yeah, you might have the right idea. So tell me this first off. How are you feeling right now? Like we're talking here mid-November when we're actually talking. Are you feeling good? Are you feeling tired? Are you feeling anything in between? Where are you at?
I feel good, man. I've had a fun season. I had fun with my daughters, and I had fun myself. I've hunted a few different states and had good hunts, and I'm feeling good, man. And I have one I'm left that we can talk about later that I'm really looking forward to. And it's just been, it's a weird, I feel like this season's been weird for me. I know you'll probably talk about this with your Nebraska recap. I feel like I've had a lot of stuff kind of go wrong, but also the opposite end is hit pretty quick. And so even though some of these things that could ruin a hunt happen, they're just going to happen. I feel like I've had a pretty level season as far as the downside being meeting the upside, and it kind of just being a really, really productive season. So I feel good, man.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good place to be at this time.
Yeah. Cause I've had seasons where I don't feel this way.
Yeah. So I kind of feel somewhere less than I should. And I don't quite know how to process that. But I guess I am letting the situation with the wide nine cloud everything else, um, because I have not felt satisfied. I felt, and I keep on telling myself, like, you got to shake yourself out of this, and I'm working on that. But I've let myself dwell on that longer than I know I should. Um, but if anyone didn't hear 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when we last did our episode together, I've had one buck I was after in Michigan, lots and lots of history. That was like my number one goal for the year without a doubt. And, got the shot at him, hit him in the shoulder, and couldn't recover him. But coming out of that, I felt so confident that he'd be back. Like, just I can see the footage. We see the arrow, like 99% of it sticking out of the shoulder. Um, and then we do the blood trail, and the blood trail is exactly like you would expect with a shoulder shot deer. Like, there's decent blood for ways, drippy droppy, and then just slowly dries up, and then nothing. And we were able to follow like a little tiny drip drop blood trail with a dog for 3/4 of a mile, and after that I was like, man, we all were at the end, we're like, hey, we're following a living deer. This deer's just been walking in a straight line forever, and now he just curled back into his bedroom, and he's going to be chasing does tomorrow probably, or something like that. That's what we were telling ourselves on October 30th, but I still haven't seen him. I still don't have pictures of him, and now it's mid-November. Um, and so I just have not been able to shake that. Like, I just keep thinking about it and dwelling on it. And so that's clouded over everything. Like, even, I hate that this is the case, but I killed that buck in Nebraska, which we'll talk about here in a second. And I was talking to my dad on the drive home, and he was so excited for me. He's like, oh man, that's awesome. You must be so stoked. This must make up for what happened the other day. And I was like, no, like, I got mad at him. I was like, no, not at all. Like, I'm hardly even celebrating like this because of what happened. So this is a long-winded way of saying that I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I've not been able to shake that kind of gloom that has settled on me because of what happened with the wide nine. And so I got to work through that. I'm working through that. And I think, some of the upcoming hunts will help me with that, because I'll be going out with my kids, taking them to deer camp, and that'll be a lot of fun, and all those other things. But
So
but it's
are
been
you at
kind
a
of a
place?
weird November for me.
Are you at a place with him where you're starting to doubt whether he lived?
Yeah, that's
I
what
mean,
I'm
like,
worried
are
about.
you getting there where you're like,
That's what I'm
man,
worried
maybe
about.
I really, really did kill him?
I don't know how I could have. I mean,
I don't
I've
either.
had this conversation with myself 1,000 times, Tony. Like, I've gone back and forth so many times. I've watched the footage so many times, and I don't see how that could have killed him. But I also don't understand why it's been 16 days or something like that, 17 days, and I don't have a picture yet, and I haven't seen him yet. And he was on, prior to that, it was like every single day. Maybe there'd be a 2-day gap here or there, but I mean, almost every single day or two, I'd have pictures of him. I mean, I'm in his core of his core. Um, and I'll jump ahead a little bit to one of the things I was going to tell you about, which is, after, so I shot him, had the shoulder shot, had all that kind of stuff happen, and then a couple days later, I went to Nebraska, which we will talk about here shortly. And then as soon as I got back from that, I got back out hunting in the wide nines area. But then I also started bringing new cameras with me. And so every time I went and hunted around his core zone, I put a new camera up. And so I got cameras now, like, right in the good stuff. Like, before, I was all on the exterior and safe locations, but now I was hunting. I was like diving into the good stuff and placing cameras in there now too. So the level of surveillance I have on this deer is way beyond anything I've done before, just because I so badly want to know when he's back or if he's back. Um, and despite that, it just nothing's showing. So that has just, every day I've lost a little bit of hope. Every day I've like, gosh, why is he not back? What's going on? And I know intellectually, like, there are possible reasons for this. Like, I've talked to I talked to Mark Drury, Bill Winke, Jeff Sturgis, and several other people who have, like, been through this before multiple times, and have all told me, like, hey, it's not unheard of for a deer with a hit like that to disappear for a couple weeks, a month or something, and then have him show back up. So I know it's possible. I'm hoping on that. I'm banking on that. I've actually debated. I've wanted to go and just, like, do another teardown, like, walk everything all over again, and, like, check every single place in the world. But I've been battling, like, do I do that because I need this peace of mind, or would I, if he's alive, then that ruins my chance of being able to kill him. And everything says he should be alive, but I don't know. This is
Dude,
me speaking the thoughts that have been going through my mind for weeks.
I don't know. I saw that video. I think it's way more likely that there was just a lot of intrusion into his world in a very short period of time, and he has other places to be and just said, nope, that place got too risky for me for a while. I just don't see that deer dying from that. That video was pretty telling, man. And
Yeah.
I think he's playing it safe somewhere else, and he's like, I'm not going in there for a while. There's too much going on.
Well, I hope so, because my strategy now has been to leave it completely alone for quite a while, and I'm not hunting, until I know he's back. So I've left it untouched for almost 10 days now, or something like that, and I'm planning on continuing on through gun season until something pops. Now, all that said, last year in November, I did not get. I got pictures of him in a 2 week window from October 20. I know from October 28th through November 14th. I only had pictures of him 2 or 3 times last year, and the year before, I only had one picture of him all of November. So history has shown that he does kind of vacate a little bit in November compared to other months of the year. And then at the end of November last year, he showed up in a big way. So I'm hoping that maybe that's what's happened here. Like, he had this crazy thing happen at the end of October. Like you said, he's like, hey, I'm not into this. And then he usually kind of ruts somewhere else anyways. So maybe he took off and is doing that kind of thing. And then hopefully, just like last year, when November 22 or 25 or 28 hits, somewhere in that ballpark, he's back feeling good. And that's what I'm banking on and hoping for. But it's just been weighing on me. Like, I just have gone through it 1,000 times, and I can't get past it.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't think he killed him. But
well,
I
you're
mean,
right.
the thing about that is a deer like that could go get hit by a car the next night, and you would you might
Mm-hmm.
never know, or some other hunter might have shot him, or like there's a lot of things that could happen there that could just be coincidental.
Yeah.
But I think he'll just show up again. Like I would just think a deer like that is like he's going to play it safe for a little while, and then he's going to start sniffing around and come back in. And I don't know. I think he'll be back.
Oh, I sure hope you're right, man. That would make me feel a whole lot better about a lot of stuff, because I don't know. There's some people who can say, like, it's just a deer, and just brush it off and move on. And I haven't been able to do that, like, ever. Like, you've known me. Like, I get worked up about deer every year. But
What? What do you mean?
yeah. But like, in a case like this, where I just, you just invest so much time and energy and everything into it, and you try so hard for it to go right, and when it doesn't, just kind of, it's a tough pill to swallow, man. So
Yeah. Well, that's the worst negative encounter. Like
mhm.
that's the worst outcome you can have, is hitting one like that and losing it after all
Yeah,
of that. Like it's the worst thing that can happen, and it just sucks. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, you're on a bunch of group texts in the fall, and everybody who hunts is and has their buddies. I mean, stuff breaks bad a lot. Like
so
it
many
is
times.
just we are like force fed, and like we're like hyper aware of this through hunting media, but we're like force fed the positives, the sizzle reels, and like the ones that go right. And it is just so the hunting deer with a bow is so ripe for something to go wrong, and it just
Man,
happens.
it's so true, and it doesn't get said enough. And I feel like what you and I have screwed up a lot of times and talked about it a lot of times, and still I feel like it's not
Dude,
said enough.
yeah, dude, I missed a spike this year. Like, I mean, it freaking happens. Like it
Mm-hmm.
sucks, but it's like things go wrong, and
It's so frustrating.
yeah, yeah,
Unbelievably frustrating.
he'll come back probably.
Yeah. Probably.
He might.
we'll see. We hope. Um, yeah, it doesn't help. Like I've got a couple buddies who are just like they know how to push my buttons, and so like whenever this topic gets brought up, they'll chime in with a negative perspective all the time. Like, well, I don't know, man. This could have happened. They know they're just doing it, so I won't sleep at night, and it's working.
Classic Peter.
Yeah, classic Peter and Ross. Anyways, that's I guess not where I expected to start this, but that is where I am, which is awaiting the wide nine's return, and in the meantime, I've been hunting a different buck, which I'll tell you about here a little bit later on a different place. But let's start with some good news. How about we start with a good story and some good takeaways? Do you want to talk Wisconsin?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, honestly, the best hunt that I've had this year, the most enjoyable encounter was with my daughter, a couple weeks ago in Wisconsin. And you and I talked a lot about the deer population over there this summer because you were going to maybe come up there. And man, it's like there's a region of that area that's about 15 miles from where I typically hunt that has a lot of deer.
Mm-hmm.
And the area that I'm in is like rough. I mean, the deer population is just low. I've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 cameras over there. And I think I've gotten pictures of 2 does that had fawns the entire fall. And so it has just been a grind. My one daughter killed a little spike right away. And then my other daughter, we hunted, I guess 5 sits, saw one little 3-pointer, no shot, nothing. I mean, it took me 20 days over there between hunting with them and myself to see a doe. It's like, wow. It's hard to describe. It's just like you're hunting where there are no deer. Mm-hmm. But it's big woods. It's fun. You see grouse. Like I like the environment. It's just tough. So I told my daughter, I was like, this is our chance. Like we have a rut hunt to go do. Cause usually, they'll kill pretty early and they're kind of out. They don't usually have a buck tag this late. And so I was like, we're going to go put a decoy out, put that Dave Smith doe out. We're going to do all day sits and we're going to get one. Dang. Like cause we're hunting any buck.
That poor girl.
Right? And she's awesome, man. I mean, we've done all day sits for turkeys, like we'd never done it for deer cause we never needed to. So we go over there and I had put this blind up in this spot and I said, let's sit here till noon and then we're going to go to another spot. We're just going to carry everything and move over. Cause I think we have a good chance this evening. The wind was going to switch, whatever. We sit, nothing, perfect, like November 6th, 7th, whatever, like frosty, beautiful, no deer, nothing moving. So we moved midday, walked over there, set up in this box blind, on this private ground that's just in this kind of corner that's just good. Like they cut through there coming from the neighbors and they kind of go around a swamp through this little corner. And I'm like, man, if they come through here and we have this decoy out, they're going to come in, like especially a little guy. Right. So we sit till like, 10 minutes after sunset, right? Like you got like a little bit of time left. Maybe it was a little earlier than that, but it was like, we were staring down the barrel of an all day blank, right? You had 20 minutes left, half hour, whatever. And I heard a stick snap back in the swamp. And I was like, that's a deer. He might be going to the neighbors or he might be coming here. And I'm like, but we got to get ready because this is going to be our chance if he shows. And I look and this little 6-pointer comes walking out of the swamp and he comes out and he looks at that decoy and he's about, 45 yards away. And it was so cool because his body language just shifted. Like he was just like a little scrapper on the hunt. And then he saw that lone doe and he like kind of puffed up, stuck his chest out a little bit. And he walked to this scrape and scraped it. And he got on his hind legs and he raked his antlers. And it was like such a palpable difference in his body language. And he finished that up and he just walked in and he couldn't take it and ran right up to the decoy, stuck his nose right on the butt, sniff it. And she laced him at, 14 yards and he ran off and tipped over. And it was so awesome. Like I don't use decoys hardly ever. And, I've killed a few deer with them, but I've had at least way more negative interactions than positive. And to have it just position one like that and just him play the game and put on a show, man, it was so freaking cool. And she was just geeked.
So what was the decoy setup? Like, how do you run a decoy in that situation? How'd you position it? All that stuff.
Well, so they're going to approach if it's a buck decoy, they're coming in head on, right? Because
Yep.
they're gonna keep track of those antlers. If it's a doe decoy, they're interested in the other end. And so I set him up 14 yards away. So that deer, if he plays the game, he's going to come in and he's going to be quartered away, focused on that decoy. And we were on a corner of a field that was supposed to be planted this year, and the farmer never planted it. So it's basically bare dirt, worthless to the deer. But I knew like the eye lines, like the sight lines are really good. So I'm like, if a deer pokes his head out and sees this in this field, he's going to see that decoy. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, if they cross through or you see a cruiser or whatever, there's a good chance that they're just going to lay eyes on it and come, and a really good chance they're going to pop out of that corner where they kind of pinch around that swamp. And so it was like scripted, man. I mean, the way he came out, as soon as I saw him look at that decoy and his body language changed, I'm like, this deer's going to die. Like, he's going to come. You could tell. And it was just so fun. Everybody brags about their kids and they're so biased toward their kids, but she's 11 and she did all day out there and she smoked him. And I was like, that is badass, man.
That is cool. Man, that's great. That's as good as you can get.
Yeah. Especially when you're in a situation where I told her going over there, I'm like, we might see a couple deer this weekend. Like, we might. But in that situation, if it's the rut, and and I know we own Dave Smith, whatever, like, take this for what it's worth. That freaking decoy looks so good. Like,
Yeah.
when you look at that in a field and you're like, man, especially a little scrapper sees it, they're not going to turn that down during the rut.
So I have never used a decoy in Michigan before until this year. I got one of those Dave Smith buck decoys. And so I was like, oh, let's try it. Just see what happens. And this was when I'm hunting this new property after, I'd hunted the wide nine for a while after him disappearing. And then I finally said, okay, I'm going to back out until he returns. So I'm on this new spot where there's lower expectations, lower risk. And my worry with the decoy in Michigan was always like, you put that thing out there and deer are going to be blowing at it and freaking out and you're going to mess up your hunt. So I would never use that in a place where I was really after a deer. But on this other property, yeah, whatever. So I just kind of wanted to see how it worked. And I did not have a single deer spook from it. And everything came in to check it out. Little bucks, does, and the does did not wig out. Like, the worry, is always like a doe is going to get spooky and wiggy on it and start blowing and stuff. And I didn't have that happen. In fact, I had a hot doe, what I think was a hot doe, well, a doe that could have been approaching it, came over and just hung out by the buck. And she just like stood around it and would then start feeding next to it. And then I had another buck come in and, try to get that doe from the buck with my decoy. So it was very cool to see that. So, I mean, TBD on killing one on one, hopefully someday. But it was fun to experience that at least. A question for you related to decoying. Back to what I just said, the risk of using a decoy is that it can spook some deer, or at least other decoy. I've used a different decoy in the past and have had that happen in Ohio and Iowa. But do you think that in a low deer density kind of place like where you were at, decoying is actually more effective because you've got a lower risk of deer spooking and is maybe a higher opportunity? Like, if a deer sees another deer in a low deer density area, they're even more keyed in to go check them out?
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a rarity thing, right? Like, I was thinking about this, I'm going to be writing some on this topic, but like, people we're so conditioned to think you got to have, like, if you get your hands on some land, you got to have these dreamy food plots and you got to do like follow like a kind of a certain pattern. But it's like, I don't know, if you're in a place with tons of good food already, bedding cover might be way more important, or water might be way more important. Or if you're up in the big woods, you have bedding cover everywhere. So like, what's rare, right? Like, the food is. And I was thinking about this with this doe decoy. I'm like, there are so few deer here that if you're a buck and if you're cruising and you don't have a doe with you, which is very likely, there's no way you're going to pass that up.
Yeah.
And the buck that I killed, we can talk about this later, but the one that I killed in Wisconsin is the same scenario. So I went from never taking a decoy into the field to killing back-to-back deer on a decoy in similar situations.
Yeah, I think that is something that does not get talked about a lot, but it makes a lot of sense. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
in a low deer density area, you might want to have a decoy out like all the time
Yep. Well,
because you framed it perfectly. It's the rare thing. We always think about the what's the rare thing from like a habitat perspective, but in some places it's just another animal. You
yep.
provide that and boom, they're locked in and come and check it out.
Yep. And I mean, I think you could kind of apply this to calling and sense. I think there's a lot going on there. Like if you were hunting there and you wanted to rattle, I mean, sure, maybe you would call in a buck, but it's like, I don't know. I just don't see it. Like the density's so low. Like, yeah, you could rattle in a deer, but it just doesn't seem like it would be nearly as effective. Or, calling, it doesn't feel the same way. Like, I mean, I guess it would kind of be like, fishing in a pond with like three deer, or I mean three fish, like you'd be like, I would switch my tactics on how I would do that versus just, like throwing topwaters all over because I know there's tons of smallies here. Now I'm in a place where it has nothing to work with. Like I'm going to switch
Yeah.
things up, and I think it's like a really good teacher to hunt places with different densities. Like I think it forces you. I mean, that's part of the reason why the public land thing is such a great educator. Like even if you're in a really good state, if you go hunt public land, you've often disadvantaged yourself in a way where you have to level up a little bit to have success that you might not have to do on private land. It just forces
Yeah.
you to think like, how do I get through this the right way to have that encounter?
Yeah. Interesting. So I guess now you've teed it up. Tell us about the buck you killed with the decoy.
So you know how it is when we do this, we have cameraman with us most of the time. And if we don't, like I've had a 11-year-old with me the rest of the season. So I haven't had like a hunt where I'm like, I'm just going to go sit in a tree by myself and,
Mm-hmm.
and hunt. And I kind of saved my Wisconsin tag for this reason. I was like, I just want to have something for myself to go do. And I kind of want to do a late rut thing anyway, because I keep thinking it's going to be like a good chance to kill a big one. So anyway, I went over, I guess maybe like on the 11th or 12th or something. And I had 5 or 6 days to hunt. And my plan was, like get in deep, hunt these swamps, get into some of these places where I know there's some big deer. And I knew it was going to be like mostly I was going to blank, but I'm like, I feel like I have a chance. And I had one spot I was saving. And this is another thing that we should probably do a whole podcast on, but I find myself, I know you do this too. Like there's a place I want to hunt. Like there's a location where I'm like, that's where I want to be now, but the wind isn't going to be right for 2 days. So what's my next best option to leave that alone and just be smart about it? And I was doing that on this spot that I really wanted to hunt, this kind of travel route along this swamp. And I'm like, I can't go in there until the wind gets right. And I've got to wait like 2.5 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working other stuff and blanking. And I finally saw a doe, nobody on her tail. I saw her twice. Like she was like all by herself. And I hunted. The wind was, it was like the third day I was over there. I've seen, one deer so far in 3 days. And I sat this stand, had some neighbors come in with their four-wheelers and stuff. And so it was like early in the morning. And I'm like, well, I was going to go saddle up on this swamp edge where I really wanted to hunt anyway. Like I was going to do that midday when the wind switched. I didn't want to do it in the dark. And so I drove back to the cabin. I had to switch my stuff out, grab my saddle and get ready to go do that. And as I'm driving back, I saw this buck. You know how like, when you see deer run, they have different kinds of ways of running, right? Like some of them,
Yes,
they're just kind of
100%.
trotting along. Sometimes they bound. But when you see that like greyhound just like down digging, it happens a lot if you like heart shoot them or you hit them hard in a bone, like they just dig. Well, I looked up and I was like, holy shit, there's a German Shepherd or something like streaking across the road, but it was a doe and she was just booking. And this buck came in behind her and they ran in to my buddy's place where I was staying. And it was like 9 a.m. And I'm like, I haven't seen an ounce of rutting activity yet. And I'm like, they just ran in there. They weren't anywhere near where I was going to go set up, but I was like, maybe I should go do that setup I did with my daughter just for 2 hours. Just maybe that doe's hot. Maybe they'll come streaking through, like something, kind of just like fell into my lap and made me rethink my plan. Cause I'm like, I still have time to go do the thing I want to do, but maybe I should give this just like a little bit of time. And I had all my stuff
close to where you saw them.
I probably set up maybe like 500-600 yards away, but where they ran across that field and went back into the swamp. But I just thought that kind of activity is like pretty rare for me to see up there. So I'm like, there might be something good, And so I had all my stuff with me, the decoy and everything. I'm like, I'm going to go do this setup again. So like a moron, I'm walking across this field with a decoy at 9 a.m. and go put it out, climb up in there. And I was like, this is so dumb. Like I know where I want to be. Like I want to go hunt like a real hunter and not do this. Like this didn't feel right to me, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, you just don't know. Right. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I just want a deer to come by so I can shoot it. Like, I'm like, I just want that part of the hunt. And like 10 minutes after I sat down, I looked and here comes this buck trotting. And I'm like, holy shit, there's one right there. And he comes through. I don't think so. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But in one of those box blinds, you have like those tall windows on the side, like to bow hunt out of. So I've got the decoy out 16 yards, quartered away, same kind of deal. And this buck's coming through at like 35 and he's like not looking at the decoy at all. He's just trotting. And so I'm like, I know because I've ranged it a million times because I sat there with my daughter forever. And so I'm like, holy crap, like, is he going to stop? And I'm like trying to merp him and he just runs right on through and stops like where I can't shoot him. And so I'm like looking at him like, I can't believe this worked. And there's a buck right here. And now I'm not going to get to shoot him. Like he's going to ignore this decoy. And I'm telling you, dude, that buck, it was like his brain was running in slow motion. Because he was like, I'm going to go run over here and go check for does on like this neighboring property. But you could see it like kind of grind to a halt. And he stopped.
Couldn't believe what he saw.
Dude, he stopped. Yeah. Face it. Yeah. He's like, oh my God, another deer. I can't believe this. Like,
can't be right.
He's facing into the swamp. And I'm thinking, I can't believe that I'm not going to kill this deer. And he looks for like 20 seconds into the swamp, spins a 180 and runs right up to my decoy and I shoot him. Just like it was. I don't know. It was wild. Like I could not believe it. And he ran off and I could see the blood coming out of his side. It was one of those wonderful blood trails where you're like, I know there's going to be a dead deer here, but I get to do the blood trail part. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it was wild. So I did basically the exact same setup twice with that decoy and the 2 deer that saw it came right in. Just
that's amazing.
Wild. So, and I mean, he's a weird deer too. I'll send you a picture, but when I saw him coming, I was like, man, that's a big deer with a runty rack. Like, you know how when you're like in Texas and they're hard to judge, like body to rack is just weird. This one's like, it looked like a horse coming in with this little 8-point rack. And it's just weird. Like, I'm like, like we always joke about like a cull buck. I'm like, I think I just killed like the ultimate cull buck because this guy's, his headgear sucks. And I don't, but it was wild. It was cool.
I mean, is he big bodied up close? Is he what you thought he was?
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, it just, and we see that up there sometimes, especially like, after a bad winter, it feels like they put a lot of resources into their body and not a lot of resources into their rack up there sometimes. I mean, it catches up when you get like an old one, they're big. Like they're, like you get 150, 160 deer up there legitimately, but they're the deer that like made it through and they have, access to the best stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I was pretty freaking happy anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, your tactic with the decoy worked very well with a doe decoy. Would you say now, like, if you had a buck, would you always still use that doe during the rut, or would you go and use the buck decoy at some point too? Like, how do you make that decision?
I don't think I'd use a buck decoy up there. I mean, there's certain situations, especially like a Halloween type hunt, or maybe the first couple days in November, I would use a buck decoy. It just depends. But that doe decoy, man, I think we've been really conditioned to use buck decoys. And that's because we're watching stuff that's created by people who are focused on really big deer. Like if you're hunting, a specific 160 in the corner of this field or whatever, like you want to challenge that deer. right? And like we said earlier, if there's, if you're in a high deer density place, he might have does everywhere. Like that's not that special to him. But I think for a lot of people who aren't like, I don't, if you're like, I just want a decent buck, I don't need a 150 or whatever, or you're like, I just want to put a buck in front of me that will give me a good shot. I think the doe decoy is like way underutilized.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, and something like you said does not get talked about very much.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about it. I'm a believer now, buddy.
So other than using the doe decoy, and here follow up question to that: would you use this tactic only in November, or do you think in a low deer density place where you're not too terribly picky about the deer you're after, could you use a doe decoy in a cut cornfield in December on a late season hunt to just get that like schooling fish effect?
Yep.
Maybe.
I mean, I used to use Montana Decoy has made a couple of feeding deer decoys. They had a mule deer one first, and it was just a silhouette of a deer with its head down, and then they made a whitetail one. I used to use that in September, October, November, and December because I would have deer come out. You take that early season, soybean field hunt. Those deer come out, in 7 different spots. They might make their way there. They might not. But when I would put that out, even the does, they'd come out, they'd get a little wiggy. They'd almost always come right over to it. And so this one, and if you're calling, if this is obviously a heads up decoy, this, Dave Smith, the heads up, it's looking, if you could put one that was a head down so you couldn't really see the head, but you could see like it was a little body, calling to deer all season long would be amazing with that. Because they wouldn't, a buck would look over there. You could, and does could look over there. You could bleed at them. Bucks could look over there. You could grunt at them, whatever. They don't really, they're not, they don't, they just know there's a deer there that's making noise. And so I think there's applications for this in a lot of ways that would be really cool.
Yeah, I think I want to experiment some more with these. It's very interesting, these different ways you can go about it. Is there any other takeaway from these 2 rut hunts, Tony, or any other lessons you learned or that we can take from them?
Man, I know we say this all the time, but there's 2 things I noticed with my hunt and with seeing other people. And this is not just in the Wisconsin thing. This was down in Oklahoma. This was actually in North Dakota. This is going to make me sound horrible, but there's an element of laziness to a lot of people's hunting that cost them. And so when I killed this buck in Wisconsin, I went out just to shoot photos and drive around. I had to go pull some stands and blinds and stuff. So I was just in and out of the woods in different spots, driving around. And the amount of trucks I see pulled like all the way through the field, parked on the edge of the woods. It's like, man, you could have walked 200 yards and not done that. Like you put a totally different impact on there. And that's super common, right? Like you hear that story a lot. You hear it during gun season a lot, like riding the 4-wheeler out to the tree stand. Like, man, you are advertising your presence in a way. Like think how often there's a truck parked right there on the edge of that field. Almost never.
Yeah.
And when there's always a person 100 yards away in that ladder stand, like that kind of stuff, how you get in there, where you park, that doesn't change, man. Like it's like universal across the whitetail space that if you're kind of taking the easy way out, you're probably costing yourself some encounters, I think, and it's often the difference between, a 15-minute walk and a 10-minute walk, or a 15-minute walk and a 5-minute walk, because this is whitetails and we're not going that far, but so that, and just time, like, I had 2 sits in a row between North Dakota and my daughter's deer that were all day sits, where the first deer that came in at the end, which is right at the end, is the deer that we killed. And you know how it is. Like sometimes you kill that noon buck, sometimes it's 1 o'clock. Sometimes you just see something that clues you into what you should do, at 11 o'clock in the morning. And I just think I'm getting to the point now where I'm like, I just think most hunters don't put in as much time as they should. Like if you're sitting there and you're like, I could go out at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock, or I could go out right now, go out right now. As long as the wind's right and the situation works. Cause it's just like, it's just time in there. And it's like, how it feels when you walk out, especially if you're sitting in the woods, you walk out for an afternoon sit, it feels like it takes a while to calm down. Like the woods has to get back to like the normal rhythm. You know, it's like, it's the same thing when you're, you know, if you sit in an elk wallow or a water hole out west in September, when the frogs start chirping again and things start settling down, you're like, okay, now something could come in. But when you walk in there, it goes quiet. And like, there's just things like that. And I just think that the more time you give it, the more time, and I know that like people want to hear something way cooler than that, but I just think it's like, you have to put in the hours.
Yeah. And it is not always rainbows and butterflies when you're sitting out there for 10, 12 hours or whatever it is for day after day after day. But to your point, sometimes that's what it takes.
Well, and you know, the thing sometimes to keep interested in that, you know, if you can do that midday switch, or, you know, I'm going to sit this pinch point today and I'm going to sit that field corner tomorrow or whatever, like giving yourself a different view. Cause you know, we see this a lot, especially we saw this when we were filming 1 week in November, the 2 years we did it. Man, you can be on a property and be in a dead zone, just dead. And you can move 500 yards away to a different valley or something, and it is on. And so sometimes, you know, sometimes you think you got to volume hunt that pinch point, make it happen there. But if you're not wired for that, like, okay, go sit a different stand, but put in your time there. Like, you know, make a qualified decision, but make sure that you're giving yourself a chance to like see this through, like what you need to see it through.
Yeah. Yeah. That change of scenery can make a huge difference just with morale and focus and all that. That's so true.
Yeah. It's hard going back to a place where you blanked a whole bunch.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, I'm glad that you did not blank in the end, Tony. I'm glad it came together. You put in the time and you and your daughter came out on top. That's very good.
Victorious. Yeah. She's
Victorious.
very, very cocky. And I love it. They both are.
That's awesome. I guess I should share my story and we can break that down. And this one's quick because it was a pretty quick hunt. We talked just after I shot the Y9, that whole thing happened that we just discussed. A day and a half later, I had left for Nebraska. 14-hour drive, thinking the whole time about, you know, what just happened in Michigan and what we just talked about. So my head spinning, my wheels turning, thinking over and over and over again about what happened with the Y9. But I kept on telling myself, hey, you got to just set this aside because you're going on your dream hunt for the year. Like, this is your hunt that was just for you. Like, several of my other trips this year have been like mentoring or helping other people and like doing these different things. There wasn't a hunt that was just like go to a place where there should be a lot of big deer and do the fun thing. Like, this was the hunt where I was going to go hunt this property that I've hunted in the past, that I was getting to know pretty well. Last year in like 2 days, I saw 7 mature bucks and I shot that really nice 7-pointer the first night. So I said going into this hunt, I'm like, okay, Mark, let's take your time this time. Let's be picky. I bet you could kill like a big, big deer out here if you just gave it time. It's the rut in the river bottoms of Nebraska where, you know, anything's possible. So I was thinking like, this is going to be the dream hunt. I'm bringing my decoy. In the evenings, I'm going to put the decoy out in these open grassy plains and going to rattle and call and like do all the stuff that actually might work in a place like this. I was so excited. So that was what I kept telling myself. Every time I'd start bumming about the Y9, I'd say, hey, shake it off. You're about to have this fun hunt, like pure, unadulterated fun. Big bucks are going to do big buck things. There's not going to be anyone out there to mess it up for you because this is private land that I have permission to hunt now. And, you know, it's several miles of river bottom. And so it's just grass all around it. And then there's this river that runs through the middle. And along that river, there's cover. And the whitetails hang out down by that and they cruise up and down. I mean, as we've talked about in the past, you couldn't ask for a better rut situation because you've got a built-in funnel all along that river. And you also have visibility. So I can call, I can decoy, I can do all that stuff that works particularly well during the rut too. So I had a game plan going in to go back to the zone that I'd hunted the last 2 years. So I had permission 2 years ago, I guess it was 2 seasons ago, and I hunted just 2 evenings at the end of a public land hunt. But on those 2 evenings, I got to know a little spot. And then I came back last year and scouted the first night, hunted the next day, same zone, got to know it better, killed this buck, scouted around some more, put up cameras and stuff. So I'd learned some more that second year. And now coming back for year 3, I had like a real game plan. I knew, okay, this is one of the main bedding areas. This is one of the main bedding areas. This is where I think I can set up for morning on day 1. And I, thought through all this on the drive out there. And, I'm thinking, definitely holding out for like a 5-year-old type buck, a big deer, I don't know what that means, but like a deer that would be like, I was like, I told myself I'm going to pass some deer. Like I'm going to pass mature bucks that are not giants, because this is like my only chance to do that. Every other hunt, I couldn't possibly pass up on a mature buck, but this might be the kind of place I could actually be picky. So I get there, chatting with the landowner, great guy. I'm very, very, very appreciative of him letting me hunt here. And he was going to let me camp out there on his property. So we went out and he showed me an area he was okay with me camping. So I was all excited about that. And just before he heads out to leave, he's like, oh, and by the way, there's 2 other guys hunting. They're hunting the whole east side. So just as long as you don't cross this line, you can hunt the stuff on the west side. And my heart just dropped to my toes. And I don't know what I said, but I think I just said, what? I just said, over and over again. Because all of the cover, all of the habitat, all of the stuff that I had hunted in the past was all to the east side. Like that was my entire game plan, was hunting the east side. And basically 2/3 of the property were now off limits to me because these other guys had got there first and had claimed it. And so all I had was the other third to the west, which had like very, very few trees. There was cover, but it's just like this buckbrush kind of stuff is what they call it. It's just like shoulder high brush that's just right along the river. But there's no trees to set up in. And I'm talking like there might be 20 yards of it along the river. And then otherwise it's grass. And then there's a couple pockets where it goes like on an inside bend, and maybe there's like 50, 60 yards of it. But I mean, we're talking slim pickings. And I'm standing there thinking, what am I going to do? And yeah, just what am I going to do? Like all of my hopes and dreams went out the window. And all of a sudden I'm thinking like, whoa, I'm going to have a hard time killing any deer now. So he leaves and I just like am sitting there with like my world falling down around me. And my poor camera guy, I just had met him like half hour earlier. We just met for the first time. And the landowner leaves and I look at him like, hey, dude, this is probably not going to be the first impression. I'm going to try really hard to stay positive, but you are seeing me in full-blown crisis mode right now because I just came off this really bad day in Michigan, and now my entire plan for this week's hunt has just gone down in flames. So we're going to have to do some real crisis management over the next half day.
So hold on a second, Mark. So the 2 guys that were hunting out there, didn't you say they're from Michigan?
Yes.
Did they know that that was your spot?
Well, I mean, it's not my spot. To be fair, right?
What I'm saying is, were they aware that you were hunting there, or was it just a coincidence?
So I believe they knew I was hunting there because we met them last year, and they had hunted a different area last year. And then this year, I'm not trying to throw these guys under the bus. They have every right to be there, and I'm glad they got to hunt it, and they had a great hunt.
Did they kill deer?
No way am I. Yeah.
Did they kill big ones?
Killed a real nice one. Yeah. One of them killed a big one. So,
sure would be a shame if somebody got out there ahead of those guys next year, huh?
I have no ill will towards them, and I appreciate that they had a good hunt. I'm glad they had a good hunt. But selfishly, I did feel like, oh no, this was a bummer. So all that said, to what I think is valuable to other people listening, I had that happen. I had like that flood of like, oh shit kind of feelings. And then I, as quickly as I could, forced myself to say, okay, stop feeling bad for yourself. Stop freaking out. Like, we have to reassess. Like, here's the cards we have. Here's the cards we've been dealt. The only thing we can do is like think through what is the situation now. We can't change the past. Can't control who else is here. All we can do is like analyze the situation we have and make the very best of it, and understand like what are the positives here. Like, what do we have working for us? And what I still had working for me was that nobody had been hunting this section. So while there's not as much cover and while I didn't know much about it, it still was, relatively unpressured. So that's going for me. Number two, it's still the rut. That's going for me. Number three, this is still river bottom stuff. So even though the area that had a lot of good trees and a lot of good cover and next to an amazing ranch with tons of deer and stuff, like even though that was like 3 miles away, I still am along a river that still acts as a funnel, and there's still deer that are going to cruise up and down this. That these deer do cover some ground, so I had to believe. I just told myself like, hey, there are still things going here that can work for you. It's still possible. You still have to follow like the basic principles of hunting the rut. Like still do the thing you're going to do. Instead of having like 10 different options, you might have two now. Like I might just have like one spot I can hunt on the north side of the river and one spot I can hunt on the south side. And you're just going to hunt the heck out of it and hunt it as smart as you can and see what happens. That was the mindset shift I tried to have. And that first night, instead of going in, I was originally going to go and hang a stand for the morning and then hunt a different spot that first night over in the zone I knew. But when this all happened, I decided, okay, change of plans. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to go get up on a hill with my spotting scope and glass this area and just learn it. So I brought my bow just in case something crazy happened, but I need to learn. I got to get eyes on this and just see if there's deer, see how deer are using it, see what's happening. So that's what I do in day one. I think this goes back to a major theme that we talked about after our September hunts, which was a theme that gets talked about a lot, which is just the value of learning stuff like scouting, whether it be through observation or on the ground. Like one hunt that's well informed by scouting is worth 4 blind hunts. I think you and I have both seen that be true time and time again. So I knew in this case, like I'm going to sacrifice the night's hunt to get a really good idea of what's happening in this new spot. So I sat up there on the hill, I glassed, and what I saw was at first mostly discouraging. There was like nothing moving on the property I could hunt, but I could see to a neighbor's property, and I did see some deer coming out there and feeding out on like a pivot field they had over there. The neighbor has a crop field. There's no food on the property I can hunt. So I saw a lot of deer leaving the river bottom on their side of the line and going to the food on their side of the line. And then I saw one group of 5 does come out right on the line and head up towards that food. So I'm thinking, all right, there's not a lot living on my stuff right now or moving through, but there is food next door. So deer have got to be cruising through my stuff to get to that food eventually and check that food, for does and all that. So I'm sitting here processing and I'm thinking, all right, there's a got to be along the river, of course. Now, can I find a tree I can get up in? And I spent a bunch of that night glassing trees, just trying to find a tree that would set up to get a stand or a saddle in. And literally, Tony, the entire night, I could not find one tree that I could get a saddle up into where I could like confidently say from this view, like, oh yeah, that's a tree that would get me up. It was almost all like the little low scrubby junk trees that like are 10 foot tall and 1,000 branches, that kind of thing. There was a few cottonwoods like way down by the river, but they're like, the way this area works is there's like a shelf. And so like the shelf right by the river, the shelf drops down like 10, 15 feet. And then there's like another layer there. And there were a couple cottonwoods down on the bottom layer. So I could see the tops of them. I just couldn't tell like how much there was to work with. And if I'd be able to get in, because the thing is like, if I'm going and setting up, I can't be down there and doing a bunch of limb trimming. So not only do I need to find a tree that has a trunk I can get up into high enough, but it also can't have a million branches because I can't, do major trimming renovations on a tree right in the bedding area while I'm hunting that day, right?
Yep.
So trying to find a tree, never find a tree. So as the evening progresses, I'm starting to think, okay, is there somewhere I could hunt on the ground tomorrow? Like maybe I could bring my saddle stuff with me, sit in the ground for the first hour or two, and while I'm down there on the ground, maybe I can get a better look at these cottonwoods from up close, and maybe I can find one I can get up into. And as I'm thinking through that, it's last light, I'm still glassing, I spot a single deer come off of my property on the other side of the river, about 600 yards away, maybe something like that, 500, 600 yards away. I spot a big-bodied deer come out of this brush right along the river and kind of go up this grassy hill and cross over to the neighbors. And I can see it is a decent sized buck. It's a solid buck. I can't really see well enough to tell you if it's a big, but it's like a a decent buck. And that gave me a little bit of hope. I'm like, okay, there's a buck doing the thing that you would hope they'd be doing. Um, that's positive. But again, on that side, there's no trees, there's no nothing. So I decide the next morning I'm going to go do the thing where I bring in my sticks and my saddle, but I'm going to go sit on the ground. I'm going to tuck myself up into a cedar tree down by the river, right where that shelf breaks. So I'm going to sit on the top of that shelf, looking down to that lower bit. And there's a couple like erosion ditches, like cuts that go down to the river. And what I had seen the previous year in the other area is that sometimes these deer would leave the river and take an erosion ditch. Like imagine like like a T junction, right? And the river bottom is the top of the T, but then every once in a while there's this ditch or gully that goes into it at a 90-degree angle. And if ever they were going to leave the river, they would take that out. So there was a couple of those that kind of angled out from the river up towards the crop fields on the neighbors. So I thought, hey, there's a chance that a deer might, come into the funnel through that too. So I got where those two met, tucked myself into a cedar tree the next morning, sat there on the ground, hoping that something would come cruising through. Again, thinking, from a rut perspective out there, hunt the funnel, which is the river corridor, and then be close to those bends in the river where there's a little bit of that brushy stuff where you'd hope some does would bed. And nothing did that. Sat there most of the morning, and no deer moved through at all. But late morning, I spot a deer on the other side of the river again and pull up my binos, and it's a tank. It's a big buck. And he's over on the other side, on the neighbor's side of the line. And then a second buck comes out, and the two of them stand there for a while. And the big guy starts making a scrape. And I tried to snort wheeze, and I tried to grunt, see if I could get this deer's, curiosity piqued to see if maybe he'd come across. Never did. But they were out there doing a thing, just kind of milling around. And then finally, 5 does came out of this little brushy stuff he was standing by, and they run down, cross the property line onto my side of the line, and go down to that same little patch of buck brush that the buck came out of the night prior. They drop in there, and then that big buck runs down and follows them into the same stuff. So I'm excited to have seen like a really nice buck, and he's on my side of the line, and he disappeared into this cover. And I watched him go into this brush, and then I saw him pop out on the other side and then disappear right back into it, and then nothing. And I keep on watching further down the river, trying to see if he pops out of it again. I do not see him pop out the other side. But
how big of a patch of brush is that, Mark?
So if you were to imagine, a snaking river, right, that's making all these S-bends, on those inside curves where it goes in, that cover might be 50 to 80 yards wide, right, at the biggest portion. And then where the river comes back up, it gets tight again. There might be no brush, or there might be 5 or 10 yards of brush, that kind of thing. But that basic trend continues, for a long ways down the river. So if you were to add up all that brush, it'd be quite a bit. But like the pocket he went to was like, an acre, maybe 2 acres. And then, then it's just like a couple little scrubby trees. And then there might be another half acre of brush, and then a couple scrubby trees. And then there's an acre or two on another bend. Like, I think it's that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look like much, but when you're standing in it, it is, tall enough that a deer could be moving through there and you would never be able to see him. So to the deer, it feels like, great cover. So I saw him go in there. I couldn't see him go out the other side, but at the same time, I knew like he certainly could just keep on going along that edge, and I would probably never see him. About an hour or two later, maybe around noon, I'm still glassing over there. I keep on glassing that whole area, watching. Around noon, I see a little tiny scrubby tree in there start shaking, doing that thing, right? And I'm thinking, ooh, like that looks like there's a buck working that tree. So it gives me another little glimmer of like, because my big thing I was debating was, is that buck in there and going to hunker down with those does, or is he cruising 2 miles down the river and he's, gone? And, on November 3rd or whatever this day was, in my mind, I'm thinking, man, there's a very high likelihood that buck kept on cruising and just kept on going. And he's not going to be anywhere near here. But you never know. And during the rut, I don't know what your thought is on this, but a lot of times if I see a buck do something once, you can't draw too many conclusions off of like a one-time thing because there can be random movements. There can be, things happen outside of the ordinary during the rut. But if you see something happen twice, I would say it goes from like a one-off to a trend.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily think that I had this buck patterned by any kind of mean. Like I did not go into this thinking like, oh, he's going to do the same thing tonight. But I said, I saw a buck come out of this buck brush here last night, and I saw a buck go into that buck brush this morning, and I've seen nothing else. This is something like, this is the absolute best thing I have to work off of. I need to be over there where these deer move through there because there's for some reason they prefer that side of the river, and they don't like the side I'm on right now. So I need to figure out a way to get to that side. Two problems with that though. One problem was that you can't cross the river. It's too deep to get across the river. And the only way to get across the river is to go several miles down the river to a bridge, get over the river on the bridge, and then you have several miles to get back to this area where the deer were. Now, we could deal with that, but we had a north wind. And this is the north side of the river that we want to hunt. And so if I were to cross the river and try to walk down, I would be blowing my wind into all of that brush where these deer are bedded. So I can't do that. So the game plan I have is I end up walking back to camp, get to the truck, drive the truck down the couple miles to this bridge, cross the bridge, and then get out of the truck. And then I was able to do a really big half moon walk so that instead of walking right along if I walked right along the river, I would spook the deer. But if I went like way, way, way north into the hills, I could get several of these big, big hills in between me and the river and hopefully not have my wind, be able to get down to them. So it's a long-winded way of saying I took a very long walk to get way, way, way upwind of them, get past them, and only once I was way past them did I circle back down to the river on their backside. And did that afternoon, got set up over on that side. The issue with this spot, again, there's no trees. So I can't hang a saddle set. I can't get up in a tree stand. So I was thinking about all this when I was sitting on the ground thinking about how I was going to pull it off. I was going to have to just figure out a way to hide in that buck brush right by the river so that with that north wind blowing, I'd be tight to the water so that my wind would blow straight into the water behind me. And hopefully that buck or some other buck doing a similar thing would come cruising through that buck brush, step out of it, and then hopefully I could get a shot. I had to figure out a way to stay hidden in there. And the other thing I didn't like about it was going to be uphill. So I was going to have to shoot uphill because down the river is the lowest point, and then the hill rises from there. So I was going to be lower than the deer and trying to figure out a way to hide myself in this grass and brush. So long story short, we sneak our way over there. The wind dies down, so it's like very, very, very quiet trying to creep in there. I'm like, little part of my soul is dying with every step because of how crunchy everything is. Plus, I have a camera guy, so there's 2 crunches for every step. Yep. And we just went really slow, painstakingly as much as we could. I actually was very frustrated because there was cattle in there, and I there weren't supposed to be cattle in there, but there were. So that was like just kind of like bumming me out because cattle sometimes don't always mix well with deer. But it helped me in this case because I actually spooked some cattle as I was trying to walk in there, and I was trying to be really quiet. But when those cattle spooked, I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to take advantage of that. I'm going to be a running cattle. So we just started scooting. As soon as those cattle started running, I started like half jogging to like pretend like mix my noise in with theirs. So I get down to the river. Then I spend like 20 minutes just standing there thinking through, okay, where's going to be the best possible place to sit my butt down and hide? And I'm weighing, okay, I have to be able to stay hidden, and I need the cameraman to be able to stay hidden. I need to also be within, 40 yards of where I think this deer is going to pop out of this brush. And then there's all this tall grass. And how do I stay hidden? Like I want to use the grass to stay hidden, but then I need to be able to shoot and I need to be able to range. And this tall, wispy grass, as you know, is a nightmare to try to get a range on anything through. Yep. And it was going to make getting a clear shot really hard because not only am I trying to use grass, but the deer is going to be uphill of me. So I'm not going to have the downward advantage. I'm going to be shooting up And so that grass is going to be even more challenging. So again, my cameraman must have thought I was nuts because I took so long to like, I would go to one spot and I was like, yeah, this is good for cover, but I just don't think I'll be able to get a shot if he comes like, if he comes this way, I'm like, no, not going to work. So I'd move 5 yards over and I'd sit here and I'd think about, well, could I hide here? Where'd my camera guy go? And yada, yada, yada. It took forever to do this, but I didn't like the situation. I was worried about shots. I was worried about us getting pegged. And if I had to be on the ground like this, I had to pick like the very best possible place to pull it off. And finally found a place that I thought balanced those criteria. I thought I could stay hidden behind this tall grass, and then I had a patch of that buckbrush right on my tail, and the camera guy could hide behind the buckbrush and film around the side of it. And I had a little bit of a lane where there had been like a trail from cattle or deer or something, so you could shoot through this trail, or I could get up on my knees and kind of possibly lean around and shoot around it to where it opened up just a little bit. So I thought I had the best possible scenario. And settle in, thinking to myself, like, what an idiot. You're going to sit here. You're going to see nothing. You've got 1,000 little cactus things stuck in your butt, stuck in your hand, and yada, yada, yada. Like, what a disaster this is turning out to be. And then I hear some crunching to my side. And I hear like a twig snap and another twig snap. I'm like, holy crap. There might be a deer coming. I like get my camera guy's attention. Hey, quiet, focus. There's deer. I hear another twig snap. I'm like, holy crap, there's actually going to be a buck's going to come popping out of here cruising early afternoon, because it wasn't like prime time yet. So anything like at this time of year, I'm thinking it's got to be a buck. And so I like grab my bow. I'm getting ready. And then freaking cattle. So I'm like, no. I'd gotten all jacked up. It was just the cows again. So then I settle back in and sitting there waiting. And maybe another hour passes. And then the same thing happens. I get jacked up because I hear some twig snapping. And then you hear a moo, and it's the cow again. So this whole thing has gotten like up, down, up, down. We get to the last hour of daylight, and I hear a crunch, crunch over there in the branches again. I'm thinking, just a cow. I'm not going to get all jacked up about it. But I'm still like on my knees, and I'm still going to glass. I'm still going to watch. So I'm looking off to my right side where this noise is, and knowing it's probably a cow, but I knew like one of these times it's not going to be a cow. So you better assume everyone's a deer, because one of the times it won't be. So I'm looking over there where the sound is, where, it's either a deer or a cow. And then I glance off to my left, just by luck. I glance to my left where there had been no sound. This is just out in the open grass. And there's the buck from that morning standing broadside. He silently had materialized out there while I was watching for the noise in the brush. He's standing out there. Perfectly perfect. I'm like, holy crap, that buck's right there. Holy shit. Grab my bow, and he starts walking. He's like on a mission. Like he's cruising, moving through it quickly, doing his thing. And I'm trying to range him, figure out what range he was at. And I tried to pre-range a bunch of stuff earlier because I knew like this was going to be a tough scenario. So I tried to pre-range a bunch of things. But again, like everything is ranging through grass. So I'm trying to like figure, okay, this little part on the hill is 30, and like if you're over there, he's 40. But long story short, I'm able to get my bow, get clipped on, can't get a range on him, guess him at 30, shoot, and it sails right underneath his belly. And so I kind of, in that moment, am like collapsing down out of like dismay, thinking like, how did you just muff another shot? And as I'm like dropping down in dismay, I noticed that he like stopped. He'd bounded off, but stopped. And so I'm crouched down. I see that he stops and he's looking back. He'd maybe only bounced off like 10 yards. Stops, turns and looks. And he starts doing the head swivel, starts doing the head bob, and then just stands there and stares for a while and stares for a while. And as I realize that he's not running off, I'm thinking, like, hey, maybe I'll have another shot here. So I reach back and grab my quiver, and I'm behind this grass. So I picked a spot, thankfully, that actually did hide me very well, because I'm able to get an arrow out of my quiver. I'm able to knock another arrow. I'm able to get clipped back on, and I'm like trying to melt into the ground as best as I possibly can. And that buck starts walking towards me. So he has no idea what had happened. He never, saw me. He never heard me. He just heard like a weird sound, and that was it. So in his mind, he's thinking like, maybe there's a doe down there. Maybe there's, what's going on down there. So he starts coming towards me. just very inquisitively, slowly takes a few steps, stops, looks around, takes another step, stops and looks around, and just starts closing the distance. And so, I shot for 30. Later, I ranged it. He was more like 40. So he's now he was at 40 when I shot. He bounded off to 50, and then he starts closing from 50 to 40, from 40 to 30, from 30 to 20, coming head on at like 20 yards. And now I'm thinking, okay, you cannot do anything, obviously, when he's coming at you like this. You need to wait until he hopefully breaks off and starts to head back off where he wanted to go. And I think he will eventually do that if you just don't get spotted.
Yep.
So just wait. The big thing was like, be patient, be patient, be patient. Like, don't be tempted to like try to pull off a crazy shot in the moment. You have to let this deer go off. And so thank goodness, somehow, by a miracle, he got to within maybe, 15 yards, never could figure out what we were, and then turned and started quartering away very slightly, heading back in the direction he wanted to go. And as soon as he got to where he was slightly quartering away so that I was not fully in his frame of view, drew back, raised up, pinwheeled him right behind the shoulder. And because of the angle that I was at, because I was way downhill of him, I went through that front lung and like clipped the back of his spine, and it dropped him right in his tracks. And he died within 10 seconds right in front of me at 20 yards. It was nuts. It was very, very intense. And I just like, when you watch the footage of me after that, when I turn and look back at the camera, my face is just like, oh, it was just pure shock. Like, did all that just happen? I mean, just crazy situation.
Man,
Yeah.
what up and down, an up and down hunt, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it every time we have one of these chats, right? But it is. And you mentioned this last time. Like, it's not only a roller coaster day to day, it's a roller coaster hour to hour during these
100%.
hunts. Or minute to minute in this case.
I mean, it just is. I mean, that's such a, I mean, I want to hear what you think the lesson was, but when I hear that, the patience to not rush that follow-up shot after you've already screwed up one is the difference maker. Like, when I hear that, I'm like, that's the difference between putting your tag on that deer and not, because it is so hard to not push it and try to redeem yourself when he's doing that. But that's the right move, is just to let it play out till when he's that close, he's probably going to give you your chance.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I think the patient, it comes down to a lot of like the little things that in the moment maybe seem insignificant, but they can, once every 20 times they matter a lot. So, in that case, like having, making sure that my quiver was accessible. Like, I don't like to shoot my quiver on, so I always take my quiver off. But you actually, like 3 years ago, did a little video for Wired to Hunt about this, about the importance of like, are you ready for a follow-up shot at all times? And, that's something I thought about a lot. But for some reason, after we did that video together, I just always think about that every time I get set up in a new place, like double checking, like, okay, if you have to have a follow-up shot, are you sure that your quiver is accessible? Are you sure you're at a good angle that you could reach it and do it? And so like, I thought about that night. I made sure like, okay, where am I going to position my quiver? So if I need to carefully and hidden pop out another arrow, I can. So, of my last 2,000 hunts, that's never mattered once, but this time it did matter. It made all the difference. Or another thing, I took so long to pick the right spot to hide on the ground. And I literally apologized to my cameraman. I told him like, hey, I'm sorry. I know this is taking so long and you must think I'm nuts, but trust me, this might be important. I took so long trying to make sure like looking at like a 10-yard square, but what's the best 1-yard square in this 10-yard square that might possibly give me the balance of cover and a shot and all that. And if I hadn't been in that perfect spot, I do not believe I would have killed that deer.
Yep.
Because he would have pegged us, or I wouldn't have been able to get that follow-up shot.
Yep. So
I think that stuff mattered a lot. So again, like the little details and trying to think through, like I said this to him that night. I said, I can't remember why I said this, but I think that one of the very most important things that whitetail hunters do, like good whitetail hunters, to be a good whitetail hunter, is almost all about predicting possible futures and accounting for them.
Yep.
So it's all about, well, what if this happens? What will I do? And what if this happens? What will I do? And this is what I think might happen. So because of that, I will prepare in this way, in this way, in this way. So like that whole night, like as we were trying to pick the right spot, I was then thinking through, okay, if a deer shows up in this spot, here's what I need to do. Here's what you need to do. If a deer pops out in this spot, here's how we're going to react. If I need to make a move, if I need to reposition, like I practice how will I reposition in this situation? And like there are all these little things that I try to do that most of the time don't matter. But I think, in this case it did. And so I just think those little bits of anticipation and preparation, the more of those you can stack up, the better. Because as we've talked about, so many things are outside of our control. So many things can go wrong. So many things can be surprises when the deer does this, the deer does that. If the more of those possible contingencies you are prepared for, the better. And this was one of the best examples of that for me.
And it like to further that point, when you're telling the story about how, okay, well, this is where I need to be. Now I need to I need to run through this and figure out where here is like the X on the X on the X. Like, where do I really need to be? If you don't have the confidence to saddle up, to get into whatever, to get on the ground and do a natural blind, you're going to find spots you absolutely should hunt and you're not going to hunt them right. And that's,
Yep.
I mean, that buck that I killed in North Dakota, I did the same thing. I apologize to my cameraman too, because I looked at every tree, every angle. Like, can I get a stand? Can we saddle? Can we stand on a limb with our saddle? Like what? And then finally, just like the best scenario here is to tuck in on the ground and pick the best spot and cross your fingers that they follow the script. But if you're going to force it, or you're just like not that confident in a bunch of different styles of ambush, you're going to let some of those opportunities slip through. And the only way to learn is to do them. I mean, that's why it's so beneficial to go on hunts like you're talking about, where you put yourself in a situation where you don't have like that tree cleaned up you've been planning on hunting since March.
Yeah.
Like when you have to show up and the deer are like, we're here, now do your job. That stuff, it's different, and it's important for your development, I think.
Oh yeah. So much. And it, that's a hunt I probably wouldn't have tried 10 years ago. Like I would not have been confident enough that, I could pull it off. I would have been like, well, there's no trees over there, or geez, I don't know. It's gonna be super risky trying to get up there and not get winded and yada, 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 or whatever. But I think to your point, putting yourself out there, hunting new places, being willing to take risks and try new things, and then learning from them when they don't work out. All of that over many years of trying this over and over and over again has given me the confidence to A, to take the risk, and B, to believe in it enough to pay attention to the details. Because the flip side could have been like, I could have been willing to take the risk, but then have gotten there and be like, man, this is such a stupid idea. I'm just going to sit somewhere and see what happens. But I tried really hard to really believe in it, and really believe in it enough to check all of those things, to dot all of those I's. And hey, 9 times out of 10, you do all that stuff and it doesn't work out still. Yeah. Right. Like I happened to get lucky that on this 10th time out of 10, this one time out of 10, the buck actually followed the script, and I got the opportunity and got the opportunity for the follow-up. So like, there's a lot of luck and good fortune that went into this, of course, but you don't get to take advantage of that luck and good fortune if you don't do all those other little things that put you in a position to take advantage of it.
For sure.
So
for sure, man.
That was the takeaway for me from that hunt. It was the little details stacking up. It was shaking off the bad news and like believing in the thing. Like, okay, hey, like everything I thought I was going to do, like plan A, B, C, and D are gone. And I remember telling my camera guys, like, man, bad news is I don't really have a plan B. Like, I don't have a plan C or D. Like, I really was all in on this zone. And I had a bunch of A, B, C, D, E options over in that zone. But now I'm in a totally different place miles away where I had no thoughts of trying to be over here. So I don't know what to do, but I'm going to have to figure it out quick. And after that initial like hour, I was like, it just got back down to, okay, now what? And that helped in a big way. And then finally, I think the last thing to think about here is you hear a lot about how you can't pattern deer during the rut and everything's random during the rut or whatever it is, yada, 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 right? And it might be true that a single specific buck may not do the same thing every night like he might do in September, right? But I think in this case, like I saw a trend, and I couldn't guarantee, I didn't know for sure if it was the same buck from the night before and that morning. And I didn't know if the same buck from that morning would do the same thing that night, but I noticed a trend, and that was enough of a pattern, quote unquote pattern, for me to say like, hey, I might be stupid, but I'm not that stupid. Like, you got to be over there.
Yep.
And so and it was inconvenient to have to figure out a way to go over there and do a big hike, and knowing I was going to have to hunt the ground again, and knowing that there was the risk of the wind and all these things. And I had moments where I thought, well, maybe you should just, do something different. But every time I went back, like, no, you got to be over there. You saw this thing. You got to listen to what the deer are telling you. We say this a lot. Like, when the deer tell you something, you have to listen, even if it's not the convenient thing, even if it's not the thing that lines up with your original plan. And that was this case. Yes, it was the rut. Yes, I wasn't counting on that exact deer to do the exact same thing, but hey, you know what? He did, and he's dead now. So that was a big lesson and reminder for me during the rut, that when you see something like that, you've got to jump on it pretty quickly. If there might be something like a random buck chasing a doe, right? And that happens in one place and it happens someplace else. And okay, like in that situation, yeah, that's random. If it's a completely wild, random thing like that. But when you see like a cruising buck do something and then a cruising buck do the same thing again, they're telling you something about that area. Like, they're cruising through there for a reason. You got to listen to that. You got to move on that.
That's such an important distinction to make. A chase is just different, but cruising is reliable. Yeah. And what one buck does to cruise, he's doing because there's advantages to it, and it's point A to B, and he's got the wind in the right situation, and he knows where he's going, and other bucks know that. So valuable to see.
Yeah. So that was my hunt, man.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, it was wild. It was unexpected in many ways, but I'm appreciative that it ended well. And I wrapped up things and hopped in the truck and drove home, and right away got back after the wide 9. I was hoping, thinking he'd be back. And so hunted another 3 days for him, like I told you, and got in all there around his core area again, like thinking just be around this major area that he spent most of his life, and be in the doe bedding areas and be on the edge of that stuff. And if he's there, he'll show. And he did not. So now I'm waiting, and hunted a new farm because I eventually decided I was going to wait to hunt the wide 9 until he shows back up. So I went and hunted a different spot where I was after a buck. There's a pretty nice deer over there, kind of a funky, tight and tall deer. And the only interesting encounter I had with him, I think, is the one that I told you about in the beginning, where I saw him run underneath another hunter, and then another hunter came in and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's the only other deer in Michigan that I would shoot. So I'm just kind of in a holding pattern a little bit, waiting for the wide 9 to show back up, or to try to get a crack at this other deer. And a little bit of a lost puppy feeling at the moment, but I got to try to practice what I preach and keep on keeping on, and see what happens next.
You've been a running cow and a lost puppy in the same podcast, buddy.
Yeah, it's hunting season, Tony. Anything's possible. So, really quick, we got to wrap this up, but I want to take like just a couple minutes here for you to give me a quick rundown of your thoughts for gun season hunting. I think you did a foundations episode about this week that we should tease for people, but give us like a real quick cliff notes. If folks have a gun season opening, or that just opened and now they're dealing with the ramifications of that, what's a few things people should be thinking about? Because that's happening in a bunch of states right now.
Man, I think the number one secret to being a better gun hunter is not hunting like most gun hunters. Like, get in the cover, get off the easy views. If you think about your gun hunting setups from a bow hunter's perspective, as far as the wind and why they should be there, and you forget that you have a gun that you can shoot 300 yards with, and you want to be able to see 300 yards in every direction. When you start thinking about what do the deer need right now, when 500,000 people go into the woods, it's always going to be in the cover, unless you just have a banging spot. But if you're primarily hunting, you're crossing your fingers, do something different. Get in where it's tighter, where your shots are 40, 50, 60 yards, whatever, not just reach out and touch them on the power line and go hunt where those deer are going to go. Like that field edge stuff, the open clear cut stuff's great, maybe opening day, but after that, they're pretty clued into what's going on, and it's time to get into the thick stuff. I think that's like the hardest thing for gun hunters to do, but probably the most important by the time you're on day 2 of the season.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to have a 300-yard range, but only be able to shoot 30 yards. But to your point, probably the better option if you are in a couple days into the season and after a deer that's not completely brain dead.
Yep.
All right, man. I think that's a good place to leave things. Do you remember the name of that podcast that you did that's all about gun season?
I don't know. It dropped the 14th.
Last week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the title was.
Something about like being your best orange-clad self or something.
How to be yourself. So, yeah. I can't remember.
Yeah. But if you want some more advice for being a more effective hunter during gun season, go listen to Tony's episode from last week on foundations. And with that, Tony, appreciate you joining me, man, sharing your story. Congrats on the buck. Congrats to your daughter. And I hope that in another couple of weeks, we will both have another buck or two down to do another one of these. I'm going to keep on keeping on, and maybe you'll have a couple pheasants down and I'll have a buck down.
I'm going to have both, buddy. I'm going to have some roosters down, and I'm going to see what I can do about killing a public land muzzleloader buck here in just a little bit too. So we'll have some more to talk about here in a couple of weeks.
All right. Sounds good, man. And to all of you listening, appreciate you tuning in. Best of luck out there as we round out November, as you maybe are kicking off gun season or late season, which is quickly approaching here. We'll be talking about that soon. All of it is great and good and fun and ripe for opportunity. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this community, and stay wired to hunt.